Today, we're diving into a really fascinating project, the translation of one of the world's most influential texts, all through the lens of a modern version called the Clear Qur'an.
So let's just jump right into the big question, right? How on earth do you translate a text that over 1 billion people believes the literal word of God? A text revealed in a specific time, a specific place, and in a specific language, and make it clear and accurate for a global audience today. The stakes are, well, about as high as they get.
And, to really get why a new translation might even be necessary, we first have to wrap our heads around the sheer difficulty of the task. We're talking about so much more than just swapping words. This is about history, it's about theology, it's a huge deal.
So let's go back in time for a second. Picture 7th century Arabia. You've got these massive empires, the Byzantines and the Persians, trade routes crisscrossing the landscape, and it's in this world that the Quran is revealed. The language, it's classical Arabic. And that's not just some old version of the language. It's incredibly complex, poetic, and really, really hard to translate accurately.
Think of a good translation as a bridge, a really strong, sturdy bridge. But to build it, you need at least 3 solid pillars. First, a native-level understanding of that classical Arabic. Second, a super deep knowledge of the theology and the context. And third, you have to be an expert in the language you're translating into, English in this case. If even one of those pillars is wobbly, well, the whole bridge just falls apart.
So what happens when that bridge collapses? Well, you get some serious problems. We're talking major theological mistakes, language that's so dense and academic that nobody can understand it, or translations that just completely lose the feel of the original, the wit, the occasional sarcasm, the power of the language. And maybe worst of all, you get these clunky, word-for-word translations that can literally reverse the entire meaning of a sentence.
And that is exactly where the translation we're looking at today comes in. It's designed to tackle all of those problems head-on.
Enter the Clear Qur'an by Dr. Mustafa Khattab.
Its whole philosophy is basically a direct answer to the issues we just talked about. The goal isn't just to be accurate to the words, but to the meaning behind them. It's meant to be clear, easy to read, none of that super dense academic stuff. And it's thematic, which helps you follow the ideas and stories from beginning to end.
Okay, check this out, because this is a perfect example of why this is so important. There's this Arabic word, khair. Now, if you just translate it word for word, you'd probably say charity every time. But that gets you into some really weird territory. Like, there's one verse where a literal translation would say an enemy army attained no charity, which makes no sense. The real meaning is war gains. Or another one that would talk about someone's intense love for charity, when the verse is actually talking about their greed for worldly gains. See, it's the complete opposite. It just goes to show you, context is absolutely everything.
All right, so now that we have that idea of clarity and context in our minds, let's do a quick flyby of how the Quran is actually put together. Knowing the basic layout really helps you see how all the themes fit in.
Okay, big picture. The Quran has 114 chapters. And they're not just chapter 1, chapter 2, they're called surahs, and you can think of each one as its own unique unit.
And inside those chapters, you've got a total of 6,236 verses, or ayats. And what's really cool is the word ayah itself. It actually means a sign or a miracle. So the idea is that every single verse is something to really stop and think about. And then, to make this huge book easier to handle, say if you want to read it over a month or memorize it, it's split into 30 equal parts called ajazi. It's just a really practical way to break it all down. So back to those chapters, the surahs. The names themselves are pretty interesting. They're often named after a key theme or story inside, like the cow or the bee or Joseph. And that right there tells you something important. The book is organized thematically, and that's exactly the kind of thing the Clear Quran is trying to bring to the forefront. And here's another thing. Almost every single chapter, all but one, starts with the exact same phrase, "In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, most merciful." It's called the Basmalah, and it immediately sets this tone of mercy and compassion over and over again. Okay, so that's the skeleton, the structure. But what's the actual content? Let's get into some of the core themes and stories you'll find inside.
If you had to boil it all down to one single idea that connects everything, it would be this. It's all about your relationship with the Creator, and in turn, your relationship with all of His creation. That's the heart of it.
Let's take a quick look at how this plays out in a story. Take the story of Joseph. At one point, he's falsely accused of something by his master's wife. But instead of just taking her word for it, a witness comes forward with a really logical, evidence-based test.
Check his shirt. Was it torn from the front or from the back?
Fast forward in that same story, Joseph is now in a position of power and he comes face to face with the brothers who threw him in a well. And what does he do? He doesn't get revenge. He completely forgives them. And that's a key takeaway here. These stories aren't just what happened. They're meant as deep lessons about justice, truth, and mercy.
And this idea of justice isn't just about personal drama. It's about society, too. This verse, for example, talks about fighting, but frames it specifically as a duty to defend the oppressed, the men, women, and children who are literally crying out for help.
So this all leads us to the bigger picture, the universal teachings in the text, and how it connects with other faiths.
All right, this next point might actually surprise you. Take a look at how many times some key figures are mentioned by name. Mary is mentioned 31 times, Jesus 25 times. The Prophet Muhammad, by contrast, is only mentioned 4 times. There's even an entire chapter named after Mary. This isn't just a fun fact, it shows a really deep, built-in connection to the Jewish and Christian traditions.
And that connection continues with its core ethical teachings, which are things we can all recognize: honesty, generosity, mercy, standing up for what's right. And really importantly, the text explicitly says you can't force belief on anyone. The phrase is, "There is no compulsion in religion." Which brings us right back to where we started. A clear translation aims to build that perfect bridge, to get us as close as humanly possible to the original meaning. But with any sacred text, that bridge has an endpoint. It gets you to the other side, but then it stops. And that leaves us with one last big question. Where does the translator's job end, and where does our own work of understanding truly begin?